This would be your steam, and this would be your cooling unit. No, this is my cooling unit. This is my steam generator. Yeah, sorry. So, I told you that the living, the lavender we produce is called population lavender, true population lavender, and this is very important to understand. So population lavender means that we start from seeds, all right? So any plant that you start from seed is going to make a population. I have a very simple way to explain this. It usually works very well. So if you have a daddy lavender and a mommy lavender, and they love each other very, very well, they make a baby, okay? Are we all clear on that? Everybody's following? Right. That baby is unique. So when you take that seed and you put it in the soil, when it grows, it's going to be different than every other seed. It's going to be unique. So each plant, when you start from seed, is unique. Like in this room, we're a population, we're all different, right? So when you look at population lavender fields, when you look at it, each plant has a different size, has a different color, and has a different smell. So you know this picture you see of the fields that go forever to have exactly the same color, those Provence fields you see? Do you know that? That's not population lavender. We have chaos and color changes in our fields. So we start from seed. And when you start a lavender from seed, for about an acre, you will get 50 to 25 kilos, per hectare, so per 2.2 acres. I'm not a big either. A hectare is 2.2 acres. So you get 15 to, actually I put it in pounds. No, really not a big. And we usually need about 300 kilos of plant to get a kilo of oil. A kilo is the same as a liter, if that understands better. For lavender, it's very similar. So a kilo of oil is a liter. So we grow the population lavender from about 800 to 1,400 meters. In the wild, you can find it from 600 to 1,400 meters. This is important to understand wilds. So this, for example, I walked in my fields and I just cut the 4 plants next to each other and I laid them down just to show you a little bit the diversity. So you can see that we have different colors, and actually it would be different size, but I put them all in the same size. But you can see the panel of color. Those are 5 different plants from the same field, but each one is unique and each one has a different color. This also shows a little bit better. You can see that here, this plant has small flowers that are very deep purple, as this one, can't see really well, but this one has much longer plants with a kind of bluish color. The other way we can grow lavender is to do clones. And it's not something weird doing a clone, and I think you've all actually done it. So have you ever cut a tree branch, put it in water, and planted it again? Or have you ever cut a basil stem and put it in water, wait for roots to sprout and put it back again? Have you ever done that? This is cloning, actually. What you're doing is you're reproducing not the baby of the plant, you're reproducing the exact same plant. It's a little like if you cut my arm off and you put it in soil and I have a second. It would be cool, but that's the idea. So the way we would produce a clonal lavender is you would go in a population lavender field and you would look for the bigger, stronger kind of plant, because that's what you would want to do. And you go, okay, you're much tougher than all the other ones, so I'm going to clone you. And you would cut all the stems and reproduce each stem to be one plant. And in the end, you will have a whole field, a whole lavender field that is exactly the same plant. This is the picture you know of Provence. So when you do clone, each plant looks exactly the same, but they actually have the same color, size, and smell, and they produce the same essential oil. They're all identical. And often when people clone a lavender, it's for their yield, but it's also because they've noticed that the plant is more resistant to a certain weather, to a certain type of soil. So if you wanted to plant lavender below where it should grow, so under 600 meters of altitude, you would plant a whole field, see what survives, and then clone certain of those plants you would have a clone that is resistant to a different altitude. And because you also select them to be much bigger, you can have up to 6 times more oil from clonal lavender than from population lavender. So it's the same Latin name, same plant. On the bottle you could write lavender, but you would have 6 times bigger yield with the clone lavender. So for Gary, there was never a question. Population lavender was always the best. From seed was always going to be the best for the plant and for the essential oil. And I'm going to try and explain this a little bit to you. There's two ways we can look at it. We can look at the environment and the future of lavender plants, and we can look at the quality of essential oil. For the environment and the future of the lavender, see it this way. When you collect seeds, what you're doing is you're letting the plant adapt and evolve. So the plant will transmit information to the seeds it makes into it, and when you plant it, the plant can evolve. So if you have natural selection in a field, so it gets too warm, some plants die off, and then you collect seeds from that field and you plant, there's a good chance that what you've planted will adapt little by little to the fact that it can resist more and more without water, and it can overcome that. Now with clonal lavender, a lot of the clones we actually have in France or around the world have been selected not last year, but about 50 years ago. And they haven't changed in 50 years. So they selected them, they were like, this plant is interesting, and they started cloning it, and ever since they've been cloning. So the plants you have in the field are 50 years old, basically. And they've never adapted, they've never changed, and they never will, because they're clones and they're always going to be the same. So this is something that's important to understand, because if we want the lavender to evolve as the climate change and as the environment change, then we can't go from clones. We need to actually gather the seeds and plant them. Even though there's a smaller yield, that's what we need to do. Now for the quality of the oil, there's also something else to understand. To make it simple, we say diversity is better. If you give me a problem to solve, just me, if I'm alone trying to solve it, or if there's 1,000 of me, I'm not going to be better at solving that problem, right? It's just clones of me. Actually, it's going to be worse because we're just going to fight. That's obvious. But when we're in a room, when we're a population and we have a problem to solve, we're all going to be better together as we need to solve it. And the idea is each plant being unique and producing a unique essential oil. For example, you will have some components in your oil that are a little higher and a little lower than they should be. But me, I'll have maybe the opposite. I'll have a little less of that one and a little more of that one. That's putting it very simply, but this is the idea. So when you crop the whole field and you bring everything together, diversity is better and you have a more balanced oil and a better quality oil. Because your clones, no matter what happens, if you have too much of this molecule and a little less of this one, whatever you do is never going to change. This is what it is. So this is why population lavender and diversity for us is better, and this is why Gary has always pushed to keep population lavender alive. And to understand this, because most farmers that aren't working with us, they get to do the same amount of work on clone lavender, because it takes the same amount of work to plant and population. It takes the same amount of work to harvest. It takes the same power to distill. But in the end, you get 6 times more oil. So what would you do? You know, if nobody cared about what was a clone and what was a population, you would go for a clone, because you would have 6 times more oil to sell than if you had a population. But Gary's never wanted to go to a clone. He wanted to stay with the quality of the oil. And because of that, we're one of the last ones in the world to actually grow population lavender. Actually, in France, we have over 80% of all the population lavender in France. So we don't have all of the lavender grown in France, but the quality lavender, we almost do have it all. And this is important because that means that nobody else has population lavender, and we're the last ones to do it. We could have bought Gary. So this is a picture of 3 different varieties of lavender. And if I were to go and cut each plant, distill it, put it in a bottle, I could actually legally write lavender on each of those bottles. But those plants are actually very different. And this is where we learned a little Latin, because actually botanical names are very important. The plant on the left is called spike lavender, Lavandula latifolia. The middle one is true lavender, that's the common name, or fine lavender. So this is Lavandula angustifolia, this is the lavender we have at Young Living. And then the last one is lavandine, Lavandula x hybrida. So those lavender are very different, and legally I'm still allowed to harvest, to distill them, and to write just lavender on the bottle. But the botanical name, I do have to write the correct one, and this is where it's interesting to note. On the back of all of your bottles, you actually have the botanical name of every plant that is in your bottle. And this is very important because that tells you what each oil is actually. So spike lavender, even though it's called lavender, is different in the sense that the essential oil is very high in camphor. And you all know what camphor is? Yeah? So do you know what camphor kind of does as a constituents? It's hot. Okay, that's a good word. I didn't know how to say that. So it's hot. So yeah, it's hot, right? And lavender is not really a hot oil. It's supposed to be actually something. For me, it's just my nap time oil. So I'm gonna say that's compliant. So if you have a spike lavender essential oil and you put it on your pillow, for example, I don't know why you would do that, but you would do that. It's not going to help you do anything on your pillow, as lavender might. So this is where it's interesting to know which oil you have. Spike lavender, actually nowadays, it does grow in the wild in the south of France, but nowadays you can only find fields of it in Spain. But because it grows in the wild in France, something funny happened. True lavender grows in the wild, like I said, from 600 meters of altitude all the way up to 1,400. And spike lavender grows from sea level, so 0 meter, all the way up to 800. So in between 600 and 800 meters, you could walk around on the hillside and you would find both plants. You would find spike lavender and true lavender. And so once again, we have a mommy and a daddy here. It's a love story, except there's a bee involved. I don't know why. But the bee came one time to the mommy. Yes, the true lavender is always the mommy. And it pollinated the mommy, and it went to the spike lavender, and it pollinated the spike lavender, and a baby was born. And that baby is really tough, actually, and it is lavandine. So lavandine is a hybrid, like in its botanical name, of those two varieties of lavender, spike and true lavender. So because it's a hybrid, lavandine also is sterile. It does not have any seeds, and the pollen is sterile. So that means that in nature, when you would find a plant of true and a plant of spike lavender, you would find some lavandine because the bees would pollinate both, and you would have seeds that would grow lavandine, but then lavandine would die and couldn't reproduce. But that's when mankind got involved. And mankind saw this plant, thought it was very interesting because it was bigger, it was tougher than regular lavender. Actually, at first it was just called a big lavender. It was just bigger of a plant. And mankind didn't find any seeds, so we said, well, we know how to do this. We just started cloning lavender. So not only is lavandine a hybrid, but it's also a clone. Okay? So if you want to, I can do a quick story if you want to see the difference. If you drive, when you drive in France on the farm, if you want to see by just driving by if it's a lavandine or a lavender field, what you're going to look for is, first of all, lavandine can only be a clone, so it's always going to be those same color fields and long. If you see different shades of color in a field, you know that it can only be a population lavender field in France. All right, so, and because we have 80% of them, it's mostly going to be one of our fields. Lavandine also has this ramification, those two arms, because spike lavender has them. So the daddy has arms, the mommy doesn't. But on a plant of lavandine, you can see stems without arms and stems with arms. But as soon as you see this ramification, those two arms, you know it can be lavender. True lavender cannot have those arms. Well, this is what I will say. And so lavandine, because it's a clone and because of its much bigger yield, actually you can have up to 10 times more oil than lavender with lavandine. It's a much lower oil and price, and because it's a cologne, it always has the same smell, so it's perfect for the perfume industry. So nowadays, if you buy soaps in stores that says lavender, or if you buy sprays that say lavender, there's a good chance it's actually going to be lavandine inside. And we noticed something funny at the castle in France. The French tourists that would come by, and we have a lot every year, we handed them a smelling stick with 2 smelling sticks. One had lavender oil, one had lavandine oil. We didn't tell them which is which, but 99% really would smell the lavandine and go, ah, this is lavender. Because all their life, everything they bought that said lavender, soap, sprays, anything, was actually lavandine essential oil. So this is where it's interesting to know your botanical names and to know what's the difference. For me, lavandine is not a bad oil. If grown properly, it's still a quality essential oil. And to find it in those soaps and in those products, I'm not actually mad that it says lavender, because it's still a natural product. And nowadays, most of the things you find in soaps and sprays are chemicals. So to still find a natural product in there, for me, it's quite good. So now to the point I was going to make, except if you have any questions.